Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. I'm really excited for this video, and it's something completely new on the channel that we have not done before, but I think it's going to be a really excellent series of videos that come out on the channel through the duration of the next couple weeks or months, however long it takes, and probably going to continue it for the rest of the channel, to be honest. And it's kind of a how-to series, which is meant to help coaches. I myself am a high school basketball coach, so it's meant to help other high school basketball coaches who are either trying to learn new ways to help improve their team win, but it's also a really good way for most of my fans here, most of the people that watch the channel who are basketball fans, to just learn the game a little bit better and look at more of the X's and O's side of things. We do spend a lot of time looking at the NBA draft, evaluating prospects, looking at individual players. This is more scheme-based, talking about how teams and coaches can counteract certain things and learn from it, and hopefully you get to see the game in the way that I see the game, which I think is a really fun way for me to talk about basketball here on the channel, and hopefully you guys do enjoy it as well. If you do, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe for more. And this episode is focused on defending the pick and roll, which is really the main focal point of NBA offense right now, but it's really starting to creep its way into the high school game more and more and more. The collegiate game has a ton of pick and roll as well. So there's a lot to learn in this video, and really, how do you go about stopping or at least slowing down the pick and roll, which I think is becoming the most prevalent form of offense on pretty much every single level of basketball. Maybe not middle school quite yet, but high school basketball, it's really there as well now. So let's jump into it with the types of pick and roll coverage that we're going to talk about in this video. Drop coverage, which is probably the most standard form of coverage, especially at the NBA level. Now, it's a little bit different high school and college, but some college programs do. Some high school programs, not as much drop coverage, but still some. Switch coverage, obviously everyone knows what switch coverage looks like, but we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons as well as we go through this. Hard hedge and recover, and then also the alternative hard hedge and blitz. Both of those have some of their pros and cons as well. We're going to talk about ice coverage, which is a very niche situation coverage in my eyes. I know a lot of people like ice coverage. I myself find it a little less useful, but I think that there is still some benefit to it. And then Celtics coverage, which is something completely new. Nobody has labeled this Celtics coverage yet, but as the name implies, it's the way that Ime Udoka and the Boston Celtics started to defend pick and rolls last year. And I think it was the reason that they had the best defense in the NBA and the reason they made the NBA Finals last year. So we're going to talk about what they did. And honestly, this is the way that I will probably be running pick and roll defense this year for my high school basketball team, because I think that is the most beneficial way to, eliminate the pick and roll, honestly. So let's get through it here. We will be going in this order. So we're going to start with drop coverage. What are the pros and cons? Well, the pros, you have your big man protecting the paint, and there's less need from the perimeter in terms of help rotations. Now, I still think that this is one of the issues with drop coverage. There's kind of this idea that, hey, you don't need perimeter help in drop coverage. I think that it would be helpful still to have a little bit of help, and we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later on in this video as well. But what are the cons here? You're going to get torched by good guard play. Think about the NBA, guys like Chris Paul, they eat this stuff up, right? Drop coverage is basically music to the ears of really good point guards, and it allows for a ton of mid-range looks as well. So if you're playing against someone with a DeMar DeRozan type skill set, or you're coaching against some team that really utilizes the mid-range jump shot well, drop coverage probably isn't for you. The only way I'd really recommend using drop coverage for your team if you're coaching, or for your team if you're a fan of that team, is if your team has a slow-footed big man. Think someone like Ivica Zubac, or maybe someone like Joel Embiid, who is better off just taking a few steps back and playing behind the screen. Or if you have a really quick defender on the ball. I also think it's really important to emphasize how important it is to have a big man. You need to have someone who eats up space in drop coverage. You don't want to put a little 6-foot player back in drop coverage because he's not going to be as impactful at the rim defensively. You want someone bigger. So if you're 3A level or lower, that's someone who's about 6'5", 6'6". If you're 4A and above, you might be looking at someone who's 6'8", even 7 feet in some instances, in like some 5A, 6A programs. At the high school level, collegiately, kind of the same thing, right? D1, you're going to have 6'10" to 7 footers playing in drop coverage most consistently. So let's actually cut over now to the iPad, and let's take a look at what this could actually look like. So in here is kind of a base shell 4-out defense. You're looking at, one has the ball on the top here, the guy I'm about to move. Black is on offense. We're going to use red as our defense, right? This is our shell defense we're looking at. So in this setting, let's say that the 5 comes up and sets a little bit of a snake screen action here. And we're trying to get a 1-5 pick and roll, pretty common, right? So the 5 here in drop coverage, what is he going to do? The 5 is going to come up and he is just going to drop. He's going to play about 4 to 8 feet behind the screen. So he's not at the level of the screen. And again, all that open space here, I'm going to move the defender to where all that open space is, right here, right? So that's what we're trying to counteract now. And we're trying to have our big man take up a ton of space in here. So let's look at our 1. He is going to be, here. 1's going to go over the screen like this, and he's attacking that open space, right? So now we need our guard defensively to also eat up this space. So he's going to come in behind the screen a little bit after, obviously fighting over. It's going to put you at disadvantage there, which again allows that kind of nail free throw line area space to be open. And off of that here, the 5-man is going to roll down to the rim. So that's where you see some of that attack offense for the offensive team. And it does put the 5 at a lot of disadvantage here because he is essentially responsible for 2 guys, which is why it's important that you have a really big man there. You want someone who's going to eat up space, be able to contest around the rim. And you do this if your big man's not super quick and out in space. Otherwise, you would just have him switch onto the 1 and you'd have your point guard drop down onto the 5, which does create some mismatches. But here you can see there are some cons to this, right? You're going to give up mid-range jump shots. You're going to put your 5 in foul trouble probably a little bit because he has to cover both the rim and the ball handler until the ball handler's defender can get back in front of him, which it could be tough. Now, if you have a really quick guard defensively, he might be able to get over the top of the screen and get back in front of his guy a little bit easier. So you have some options there in drop coverage, but for me, drop coverage is not my favorite thing. I think that it has some benefits for sure, but there's also some flaws with the way that this works in terms of, you know, you're allowing a lot of open space on the floor, but the biggest thing to note, look at our 2, 4, and 3 defenders. We didn't have them rotate in. And we'll talk about that later in a certain coverage that I think does allow for them to actually help out quite a bit, but it does also have some flaws too. There's no great, perfect pick and roll defense. You kind of have to pick your poison a little bit here, but that's kind of what you're looking at for drop coverage. So now let's look at examples of that here in video. Here's one, the Boston Celtics against the New Orleans Pelicans a couple of years ago. You see Lonzo Ball gets screened by Daniel Tice. Jason Tatum walks into an open jump shot because it's going to be open there. That's where the spacing is. Lonzo Ball has to fight through. And luckily, Jason Tatum airballs. But you see the Pelicans big man drop and gives about 6 to 8 feet again of space for Jason Tatum to attack downhill. But this way, he's able to tag both the roller and the ball handler. It's not like one guy has a straight line open drive. He's kind of impeding both of them, but at the same time, he's kind of not guarding either of them. It's tough, but that's, I think, a really good example here. And we'll go into our next example as well. Here's the Milwaukee Bucks defensively against Devin Booker. And you see Brook Lopez, I think one of the best drop bigs in the NBA. Look at him. He eats up some of that space, deters Devin Booker at first. Now, part of the reason why this was successful in this instance, Jay Crowder set the screen about 35, 40 feet away from the hoop, which allows Drew Holiday a ton of time to get back into the play. But you're also going to notice Devin Booker didn't really look to attack here in the mid-range, probably had a jump shot right around the elbow area here if he wanted it. But look at the other defenders here. We see PJ Tucker, Chris Middleton, Giannis Antetokounmpo. They're not required to go help out in this situation. Giannis stays attached to Ayton. We see PJ Tucker stays attached to Chris Paul. And Chris Middleton's in good shell defensive position to cover Mikal Bridges if he were to catch on the corner there. So you see some of the benefits here, right? You don't have to rotate over. Your defense stays pretty solid, and you're playing 2-on-2 in the pick and roll. Now, for the Bucks, this works because they have a really good drop defender in Brook Lopez and a really good on-ball defender who's got great hands in Drew Holiday. This team can make it work a little bit better than others, but it's not quite that easy. And we'll see in some other examples why some other teams elect to go a different route. Really, drop coverage is dependent on your personnel in some ways. If you don't have the right personnel for it, drop coverage is going to be really hard to execute. Which brings us now to switch coverage. And we look at some teams in the NBA that switch. The Miami Heat, Los Angeles Clippers are two of the most prolific examples. The pros here, easiest way to navigate screens, right? You're just switching through them. You don't really have to fight through screens. You just say, hey, you got him. If he goes left, I got him if he stays right, basically. It's like playing sides in 2K if any of you guys do that. Now, it creates no on-ball advantage or disadvantage for the defense, which is really no advantage for the offense. It does in some ways create an advantage, but guys aren't out of position. Guys aren't having to fight through a screen is more so what I mean by that. The cons, you're a little bit more open to slipping or splitting screens between switches. So when a guy comes out to switch, if you have a really good ball handler who's quick, De'Aaron Fox does this all the time. He heading to his right, he pushes it back left and gets downhill. You're liable to splits in pick and roll then. And then also slipping. If a big comes up to screen, guard takes about one dribble over, they're about to trade off, and the big just slips it downhill. Nice little pocket pass in there is going to beat the switch pretty much every single time, which does force some rotations behind the pick and roll. But that's a very niche situation, and some guards can't make that pass, especially if you're a high school coach. Now, one of the other cons, though, mismatches. Think about it if you are, a team like the Clippers. If Zubats is on the floor, if you're switching Zubats out onto the perimeter, and they've done this a ton in the past against Luka Doncic in playoff series specifically, Luka Doncic would eat up Ivica Zubats in a switch. We know that. But also on the back end of things, the Mavs haven't had a prolific post scorer, but let's say they did. You would be switching on maybe Reggie Jackson or another guard, right now maybe John Wall, to a big man. And the offensive team would have some mismatches that they could attack if they want to. Now there's ways to counteract that as well. Maybe you overhelp on the drive for Zubats if you want to help him. But you are setting yourself up for a little bit of struggles in other areas outside of the pick and roll. And that's why some teams use the pick and roll. They just use it to get the switches. And then from there, they look to attack in isolation, which at the high school level, a little bit less common. You really need a good high school player to do that. But if you have one, it could be a really advantage situation for your offense, and the defense might put themselves at a disadvantage this way. I recommend using switches if your team has a really quick big man who you think can live out in space and switch on to perimeter players. Definitely could be a very helpful tool. Or if you don't have a big man, or maybe you have only one big man in your program, and when he's out of the game, how are you going to answer pick and roll defense with small ball? And it might have to be switching. You might just have to say, hey, we're going to work our tail off. We're going to switch a bunch, and we're going to fight for post position with the other big men on the other team if you don't have that. We know a lot of 1A, 2A, 3A schools, if you don't have enough big men talent, you might have to go this way. Also, facing a good shooting big man, that's a benefit of the switch as well. It limits pick and pop game. Obviously, in this video, we're talking specifically pick and roll, but part of NBA offense right now, collegiate offense, and even permeating into high school offense is the idea of picking and popping. As big men get more and more skilled, they tend to shoot a little bit more threes, and it opens up the floor for everything, especially if you're going to screen and pop. And when you switch, you basically stay right there attached to the screener with the guy that switched off of the ball handler, which does close some things off. So now as we go back over to the iPad, again, we've got our same basic shell defense here. So let's look at what it would look like here if the offensive team comes up to screen, again, on the point guard. We get that same action. And we know now that the 5 is not going to be in drop coverage defensively. He's going to walk up here with him, and he's going to play at the level of the screen. You see, he's basically parallel with the screener. The whole point of that here is now this number 1 defensively, this guy right here is going to be out in space with the ball handler, right? And anything to this side of the screen that I'm showing here right now with the movement, he is responsible for the ball handler still going that way. But likewise, the 5 on the other side is responsible for if the 1 does go on the screen, or does utilize the screen, excuse me. So let's say the 1 does go this way and attacks off the dribble. Here now, the number 1 defensively in red is responsible for switching onto the 5, which this is where if the 5 were to dive, that's where you're open up to some of those slips like I talked about. Now it's really important here for the 1 defensively to beat him to that spot. He's got to work really hard. He's got to sprint downhill to get there. But if he can beat him toward the rim, that's where you have some benefit. And when I talked about those help rotations, maybe this guy shows in a little bit, maybe this guy shows in a little bit, and you're bringing in a little bit of perimeter help to kind of slow down the big man, especially if this is a negative switch for you. Now, some teams, think about when Philadelphia had Ben Simmons back in the day, you're looking at a 6'10" point guard switching onto a big man. That's something you would live with. Now, a lot of high school programs, some collegiate programs aren't going to have that type of switchability, but some NBA teams do, which is why some teams elect to go this way. Think about Miami with Bam Adebayo. He is super mobile. He's very switchable, which is why they're able to play this level of defense. The Clippers run it because they play small ball pretty consistently playing either Nicholas Batum or Robert Covington kind of as their pseudo center in a lot of ways. But that's the benefit, right? There's not really an advantage in this pick and roll action for the actual ball handler. Switching out there on him, you know, some teams will take it slow and there's not really a huge advantage there, which is why switching defense in the pick and roll can be pretty beneficial. Let's go over and look at some examples of this here. The first one here is the Phoenix Suns, and you see DeAndre Ayton gets switched onto Luka Doncic. Not really by plan. He was originally in drop coverage, but with the screen, Cam Payne did not do a good job getting over there through it. See, Ayton is not at the level of the screen, but he wants to not be switched on. But since Payne did not get through, it's a forced switch, and Luka Doncic, using that advantage of the offense, is able to go score the basket with ease because he's quicker, more mobile than DeAndre Ayton. As you see, easy penetration, blow by, bucket. Going into our next example here, here's the Houston Rockets, who made switching really a key part of their team, especially after they traded Clint Capella. And look at it now. They force a miss here, but watch the rotations off of this. We get a screen, Harden switches on. The pop from Maxi Kleber really gives you nothing, and PJ Tucker is that help rotation defender, like we talked about how this is going to work. Watch again. James Harden switches on. Kleber pops. There's nothing there for him. Tucker rotates, and good defensive rotations, and James Harden putting in some pretty good defensive effort there ultimately forces a Kristaps Porzingis miss. Now, it's still a pretty open look. When you have those types of defensive rotations like that, it does put your defensive shell into a little bit of stress. You're going to give up some open perimeter looks like this, but you're going to live with that, right? Especially big men shooting 24-foot jump shots. You're going to say, hey, we have to live with something here. We'd rather give up this than shots right at the rim that are a little bit easier to work with. Now going into the hard hedge and recover. This is a different type of defense. This is very common, especially more like 10 years ago. Drop coverage and switch coverage has kind of taken over the NBA in certain ways. But I still think there's a lot of value to a hard hedge recover, especially at the high school level and somewhat in the NBA level. The pros of this here, you allow your time for guards to get through the screens, which is important if you're trying to not switch. If you feel like that's a negative advantage for you, if you feel like you're at a disadvantage because of switching, you want to use a hard hedge recover system some of the time if you don't have a big enough center to go into drop coverage. And it doesn't allow for slips super easily because of the way that the guard is already going to generically be moving. The cons here now, it's liable to be beat with quick decisions. If you have a team that's very selfless that you're playing against and knows how to move the basketball quickly with touch passes, and the guard knows to get the ball out of his hands quick in these situations, you could get torched by this, definitely. And this also requires some backside help like we saw with the switch defense. Now, I would recommend this if your team has a problem with getting through screens. If your guards aren't super quick, this is probably a decent option for you. And if you have a smart big man, because it does put a lot of pressure on your big man in order to be successful running this type of defense, because they are really the ones who have to go out, tag the ball handler out in space, and still find a way to recover back to their guy. When I say hard hedge recover, the big man's the recover guy and the guy hedging as well. So there's a lot of pressure on him. Basically, anytime you're building a defense, you have to think about your center first. Most defenses are built around the center, and this one I think is a perfect example of it. So let's go back over to the iPad now and take a look at it again, just our normal shell coverage here. And let's get the 5-man coming up to set another screen here. Get that type of screen. And now with this, remember, we're having the 5 hedge. So that hedge is going to look something like this. It's going to look like we're switching, right? Back to that same spot. We're going to go up there and switch. But we're not actually switching. What's going to happen here is as the 1 attacks over, our defensive guard is going to go under. It's a hedge under scheme. So as the 5-man likes to roll, excuse me, that should be a roll, but that's okay. The 1 is going to fight underneath, just like we saw earlier in the switch. But the issue is we're not switching. So what has to happen here now? We probably want our 2 to show a little bit, get a little bit of more of body in front of the 1. Our 4 has to come in and hedge a little, and so does our weak side 3. Basically, you're trying to fill up the paint a little bit more, get some more bodies close to the roll man, because in this situation here, the 5 has to recover back downhill, and the 1 is coming back out. This can work if the opponent guard does not shoot super great, but they are a threat from the perimeter. If you are playing against somebody who's a lights out 3-point shooter, this could be a little deadly for you as your big retreats from him. It could leave you pretty vulnerable to some wide open looks, but the benefit here is your one goes under the screen, can get back up, and you don't have to switch. You don't find yourself at that disadvantage, and you have some help side rotations behind it. So let's go back and take some more looks at what this could look like. Here's an example of Kevin Durant actually being the screener, and this is a very old clip of Tony Allen. They didn't want Tony Allen to leave Kevin Durant's side, so you're going to see here he basically stunts at Reggie Jackson in this action and allows time for his teammate to get under the screen here from Kevin Durant, kind of slow down KD's progress towards the rim, but also get back in front of Reggie Jackson before a wide open shot is allowed. Now again, though, look at Reggie Jackson. If he's a sniper here, that's wide open 3-point shot that he just passed up. If that's Stephen Curry or someone who can shoot the ball at a very high clip from 3-point land, you probably don't want to play this type of defense super consistently. Mixing it in could still have some value, but you just have to be very careful about that. Obviously here, the reason that Memphis is playing this way, they don't want Kevin Durant getting easy post-up looks on other players other than Tony Allen. They want Tony Allen to stay attached to his hip. Now we look at another example here, and this is where quick decisions can really hurt the hard hedge and recover system. Look at Blake Griffin. He does a very good job going out and tagging, but Tim Duncan, one of the smartest players to ever play this game, identifies what LA is going to do here, and he actually slips the screen, doesn't even make that much contact with Chris Paul. And because of that, Paul doesn't actually go under Tim Duncan here and allows him to get a very good look at the rim, because the Spurs here play 2-on-1 with Splitter and Duncan versus DeAndre Jordan at the rim. And this is just an impossible ask for DeAndre Jordan to cover, even in his prime here. He had no shot in this play. And it's because Tony Parker was very selfless, got the ball out of his hands, even when he had an open perimeter look, arguably. And Thiago Splitter knew exactly what to do with the basketball here. Very well coached in this situation and setting, and knew that Tim Duncan was going to be rolling wide open to the rim with the way that he read this play. The Spurs spacing here is a little awkward. This is sort of a zone defensive look here from the Clippers, but it's still a pick and roll, so some of the same rules still apply. And the Spurs did a really good job here beating this look with some quick decision making. Which brings us now to the hard hedge blitz, which is basically the opposite option here from the hard hedge recover system. The pros here, you're going to generate more turnovers, you're going to have way more pressure on the ball, and the opposing guard, the opposing ball handler, is going to be a little less comfortable throughout the game this way. This also forces the ball out of the guard's hands. So great times to do this is, we'll talk about that actually in a second. The cons though, forced into a lot of defensive rotations, and you're playing essentially 3-on-4 on the back end because you're committing 2 to the ball. A lot of offenses want you to commit 2 to the basketball because it means they have a 4-on-3 advantage later in the possession. But this defense, you want to run it in order to put 2 on the ball, get the ball out of the player's hands. And there's 2 reasons to really do this. If you're facing a team that you think that their ball handler is not that good, and you can generate some easy turnovers here by pressuring him, maybe getting him uncomfortable and throwing a bad pass or an errant pass, and just not really reading the defense. That's a really good reason why. Another great reason would be if you're facing a great ball handler. Let's assume, maybe this is Steph Curry. You don't want Steph Curry to beat you. You want to force the ball out of his hands. Now, he's one of the best relocation shooters. Not that it's going to solve all your problems defensively here, but ideally the goal is, okay, we're not going to let Steph Curry get open looks in the pick and roll. So we're going to force him to pass the ball, and then we're going to try and recover behind it. If you're facing a great ball handler, I think this could be a successful defense. Or if you're facing a lesser opponent, a lesser ball handler, you can definitely get some easy turnovers and generate points in transition this way. So let's go over to the tablet. Let's go look at what this will look like. Again, get the 5 coming up to screen. We've been talking about that the whole time. It's how basically all of these plays are going to start right in the pick and roll. And again, it starts with a hard hedge. So our 5's going to hedge out hard. He's going to be out at the level of the screen, ready to pick up the point guard if he goes to his left hand here using the pick and roll. The difference here now, though, from the last one is instead of having to recover as the one attacks, the other point guard, our point guard, is going to also attack through here. And this is where we get that double action. I'm going to move the 2 right here just to show you where that double comes. This is where the point of attack is. This is where the double occurs. So, of course, what the offense is going to do here now is the 5-man is likely going to roll this. Just like normal, pick and roll. So that's the open spot on the floor. it becomes everyone else's responsibility to cover this. So that means the 4 is going to have to rotate to the paint. 3 might rotate over as well. And basically what you're betting on here is that if the 1 can slip the ball into the 5, that the 5's not a good enough playmaker to kick to one of the corners. What you would probably have happen here is your 2 would probably play middleman between the 2 and 4 on the left side here. Just trying to play a little bit of help defense. Now you are, liable to giving up some cut action. This is what the Warriors do super well with Draymond Green, is Draymond Green will catch the ball in the middle of the floor and they'll get a little backside cut here from their 4-man or their 5-man, in some cases Kevon Looney, and Draymond Green's going to lob that ball up to him because he's a very good playmaker in that spot. But you think about some other big men in the league. You think about a guy like Jakob Poeltl for the Spurs. Is he going to be able to make that kind of pass, catching 15 feet away from the hoop where he's not as much of a threat to score? No, and that's kind of what you're banking on here in some of those situations. You want to force the ball out of the point guard's hands in a lot of these settings, and this is the best way to do it. And the whole hope here too is, as well as we move this guy, the whole hope here is to get a lot of pressure in here and generate a turnover, and you're going 2-on-1 on the other side of the floor. That's really the goal here of this defense. So let's look at some examples of that now. The hard hedge blitz here, you see Steven Adams comes up to the level of the screen back when he was playing for New Orleans and forces the ball out of Kawhi Leonard's hands. Now watch Brandon Ingram here. He does a really great job on the backside. He is the tag man. He leaves Nicholas Batum wide open. And because of that, Kawhi Leonard correctly makes the skip pass to Nicholas Batum. And we see the top rotation guy, who was the 2 in our example from the tablet, come down and help. Right here, that's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He rotates over. And then the Pelicans are forced into rotation, ultimately give up an open 3 to Patrick Beverley. This is an example of really good passing, though, from the Clippers and just awareness of what to do in this type of defensive shell. But again, if Ingram doesn't come over to pick up Ibaka, it's going to be an open dunk at the rim. So you need to have those rotations. Of course, Kawhi Leonard's such a good player. He's likely not going to turn over the ball here in these situations. But the whole hope is we're not going to let Kawhi Leonard beat us in the pick and roll, which is why New Orleans in this setting was executing this type of defense. And then you look at another example of the hard hedge and blitz here. We see Golden State actually from this past finals executed against Boston, and they do a phenomenal job recovering and ultimately get a steal. Gary Payton II is actually the help guy here. He picks up Marcus Smart in the middle of the floor. Smart is a good playmaker, but because of GP2's reaction and his understanding that, hey, I can come here now, Marcus Smart's right read should have been to Jaylen Brown. But with the way that the rest of the Warriors recovered, you got Kevon Looney underneath, you got Klay Thompson still being able to recover to the corner on Al Horford, and Gary Payton II does a really good job finding his matchup again before forcing the turnover here. This is like basically perfect hard hedge blitz defense, where you see the screen comes, Curry gets up high, forces the ball out of Jason Tatum's hands. That's the whole point. You're going to see this run against a bunch of really good players in the NBA. You think about guys like James Harden, Luka Doncic, they consistently get the ball forced out of their hands with doubles. This is where you're going to commonly see that happening, and this could be a good option for you to run in your own defensive setting in the high school level or college program as well if you're coaching at that level. So now we go into ice coverage, which is, again, much more niche and not quite, frankly, as used as often as some of these other defensive coverages. It's typically one that will lead to a lot of crossover highlights as well, if you guys know what I'm talking about. Pros, you force the ball handler into help and you negate the screen most of the time. We'll see what that looks like specifically and how there's benefit to this. Cons, though, you allow a straight line drive, which is one of the cardinal sins in basketball. You don't want to let guys get straight toward the rim. You don't want guys to attack straight downhill. That's what this defensive coverage allows, but you might be wondering, why is this a good defensive coverage to run then against the pick and roll? And the cons here, you're also going to leave the big man wide open on pops, and you'll see why. There's flaws to this defense, which is why I don't like it as much. I recommend this for your team if you're trying to force baseline, which is really only on side pick and rolls. There's not a lot of real reasons to run ice coverage. For me, I will not run ice coverage working with my high school team that I coach, simply because I think that there's too many flaws in the way that it works. And I think you leave yourself a little vulnerable to too many things trying this. But let's go over to the tablet and see, maybe you do like this. Maybe you think this is perfect for what you're looking for. So on the tablet now, you can see the one here is actually on the left wing. So we're talking about side pick and roll, whether that's off the wing or out of the corner. Those are the two spots to really run ice coverage. what will happen here is the 5 is trying to basically allow his guard to get to the middle of the floor. So he's going to come up and he's going to set a screen just like this towards the middle of the floor. He's going to try and pin the 1 so that the point guard can get toward the elbow area of the court, which will open up everything else on drive and kick opportunities, forcing the 3 to help. What the defense doesn't want that to happen. So what the 1 will do here is he is basically going to come up here and form a wall. He is giving up this entire drive. He wants the guard to drive this way because he doesn't want the guard to come in here and force the 3 to help and get a wide open kick out to that corner. So because of that, the 1 is going to say, okay, thank you very much. I'm going to drive that way. I'm going to reject the screen. And you'll notice here, this is basically drop coverage off of a side pick and roll, but the ice forces the guard to not use the screen. Now, the issue here with this is the 1 then from this spot is going to try and recover back down in front of the point guard because the 5 on the back end has to be in drop coverage covering this area. Otherwise, it's an unimpeded layup right at the rim. So because of this, if the 5 were to just simply pop, you're going to see a wide open look here where the 1 from this spot would pass the ball back out to the perimeter. And since both guys are collapsing toward the rim, the 5-man's wide open. And if the 5 doesn't drop properly here, you're going to just give up a wide open layup at the rim. So let's look at some examples of this. What does this exactly look like? In ice coverage here, you're going to see Jalen Brunson beats his guy downhill because they don't want him to get back to the middle of the floor. You're going to see the way he jumps up over the top of Porzingis. But because of that, Jackson Hayes is occupied, trying to get back in, Kyra Lewis, and Porzingis is left completely wide open at the top of the key. You could argue maybe Najee Marshall should have rotated there, but that's a very tough rotation to make off of Tim Hardaway Jr. right there on the opposite slot. So you're going to give up some open shots from the slot, from the corner running this type of defense, which is why I really don't like it that much, especially if you're facing some skilled competition. And Jalen Brunson's such a pro guard. He knows exactly what's going to be open here as soon as he gets downhill and sees that he's squared up with Jackson Hayes. The next example of this here is JJ Redick actually getting crossed over. I think that this was going to be a ghost screen from Shane Battier, but you see JJ Redick out of the corner of his eyes realizes, oh, I'm about to get screened here. And he tries to hop up on top of Dwayne Wade's right hand. And because of that, Dwayne Wade has an easy crossover back to his left. And JJ Redick looks really silly. Most of the time you get crossed up in the NBA, if someone looks like they got crossed up on the wing or out of the corner, it's because it was an ice screen. They're actually just trying to prevent the player from going that direction, and the guy crosses over at the exact right time when he's about to jump that. And because of that, it looks like he got crossed when really he's just trying to execute a simple coverage for pick and roll. So now we go into Celtics coverage, which is the one I'm really excited to talk about in this video. I think all of these are good options though. Besides ice coverage, don't love it. But I think that there's good options in this video outside of Celtics coverage. But the Celtics coverage, I think, was really elite. And Ime Udoka and the entire Celtics coaching staff, Joe Mazzulla, still runs it right now with Boston. It's really great. The pros here, you basically pinch the ball handler with additional help. You're essentially guarding the 2-man pick and roll with 3 players. And it does not allow for direct pick and roll baskets easily. So the roll man's probably not going to score. The actual pick and roll ball handler is likely not going to score. Which, of course, though, you send 3 guys to guard 2, means you've got 2 guys to guard the remaining 3 for the other team. So the cons of that, rotations need to be near perfect for this to be successful. So if you're not sure if your whole entire team can pick something like this up, you're going to have a challenge on your hands. And it also allows for a lot of open looks from the perimeter. Even if your rotations are immaculate and perfect, you're going to give up some open shots still, just with the way that this works. Basically, if you run this type of coverage, you're betting that your opponent can't make enough wide open threes or just open threes in general to beat you. That's kind of the bet you're making here, which is why the Celtics did not beat the Warriors, because the Warriors have a ton of shooting capabilities. I recommend this if your team has a good amount of size and shot blocking. If you've got people who can rotate, affect shots at the rim, it does open this up for you a lot. It also, takes up more space defensively when you've got longer wingspans, guys who are just a little bit bigger naturally. And it also will really work if your opponent doesn't shoot well from 3. So if you have, data on, hey, how many threes are they taking a game? What's their percentage from 3? And you're like, oh, they only shoot 20% from 3 or, 25, 30% from 3. You might be able to live with 10 of their possessions ending with 3-point shots and only 3 of them going into the basket. That's kind of what you're banking on here, is our opponent's just not going to shoot the ball that well. So let's run this style of defense. And let's go look at it now on the tablet. You're going to notice that this is very similar to drop coverage, but it's tweaked significantly in a way that I think can help a lot of teams. So here, let's start with the 1 again at the top of the key with the ball, and the 5 comes up to screen. And I think for importance here, let's just have them screen this way. It doesn't really matter, but I think either way, it shows kind of what's going on with this. It's a little bit of a combination between the drop defense, switch defense. There's a lot going on this. So what's going to happen here is your 5 defensively is going to come up, and he's going to play drop coverage again, about 4 to 8 feet off of the level of the screen. And he's just going to be kind of playing contain there in the middle ground. What your 1 is going to do is he's going to fight over the top, just like we talked about earlier, while the 1 fights over on the actual drive. So he's trying to stay in the play, your defensive point guard is, while defending the ball handler. And as the 5 rolls here from this spot, the one who's screened, let me cancel that. As your 5 rolls here, you're going to say, oh, it looks like drop coverage, right? This is where Celtics coverage is different. A lot of the times they'll use Robert Williams in this role. He's really the master class of this defense and why it's so successful. He rotates over hard, which allows the 5 to play up and actually engage the ball handler here if he wants to. Or if your actual point guard defensively gets back in time to this spot, if we go back a couple stages, if your point guard does get in here and beat him to the spot, the 5 can actually then recover, play right here, and you might be worried, oh, what about a lob pass over top? Because we've seen so many guards throw that in the past. That's the point of Robert Williams on the backside here. Sometimes, though, it doesn't even have to be Robert Williams. The Celtics have used guys from this spot, especially if, say Al Horford or Robert Williams is engaged in the pick and roll. They'll help out there. And then this 4-man is kind of responsible for playing both sides. He'll play the 4 and the 2 here. Again, you're still liable to give up some back cuts, but this is where having size and shot blocking is really important. Let's go take a look at what the Celtics did here. And I think this is one of the best options for pick and roll coverage. Sending 3 guys to guard 2, it's a risk, but it's one that is well calculated, and when it's well executed, it works phenomenally. See here, Celtics coverage against the Warriors in the finals. Get little Steph Curry pick and roll action here. Al Horford, and you see Marcus Smart's actually the guy who helps. So Derek White's not able to get around this screen in time. And because of that, Marcus Smart is the 3rd guy to guard 2. And he comes and helps on Steph Curry, which leaves Gary Payton II open. But as you can tell, the Celtics aren't worried about that. They're saying on their scouting report, we're going to let Gary Payton II shoot above the break 3s. And if he makes them, he makes them. We're going to live with that. Look at how much space they gave him, and he didn't even pull the trigger on it. Someone who's much more confident as a shooter from the corner. This is well done execution in terms of scouting and personnel recognition by the Celtics defense here. And Marcus Smart does a really good job not allowing for space for Steph Curry to get off his little floater that he loves to take there from that elbow area. Another example here from that same finals, the Celtics, we get Steph Curry in a pick and roll action again. Marcus Smart rotates over. You see they leave the corner open. Look at who they're helping off of here. They're helping off of Draymond Green out of that corner. And Draymond Green, a very smart player, knows, hey, I'm going to go right into a dribble handoff here with Klay Thompson. The Warriors get a pretty decent look, but Marcus Smart knows, hey, I've got to rotate back to my guy out here on the perimeter. He covers for Jaylen Brown, and Klay Thompson gets somewhat of a contested look. I'd say it's still a pretty decent look for Klay Thompson. But at the high school level, if you can defend this way, there's not a lot of high school players that are going to be able to hit that shot. There's not a lot of high school players who are going to be confident enough to go right into a dribble handoff like Draymond Green here did as well. Again, the whole point is to slow down the ball handler, slow down the pick and roll. Look at Kevon Looney here. Al Horford's able to stay at home, takes him out of the play, and the combination of Marcus Smart and Derek White here really limits what Steph Curry can do, and it's all started by Derek White's ability to get over the screen and really help out in that setting. And then we go into my final play here that I want to talk about for Celtics coverage, and it's actually from the Eastern Conference Finals between the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics. Look at it here now. Jason Tatum fights over the top here of the screen. Horford's in drop coverage, and watch Robert Williams. Jimmy Butler did a really good job putting pressure on the rim here. Al Horford is forced to take the ball handler. So Bam Adebayo looks like he's wide open. He's not, because Robert Williams rotates over, and the Celtics do a phenomenal job recovering around him. Again, watch Robert Williams. He dives in hard, Derek White takes the ball, Jaylen Brown rotates, Jason Tatum rotates, and they cover it really well. I'm going to let it play one more time because I think it's really important to see this play. This is a perfect execution again, and how they can show different looks defensively, still running the same style of coverage of 3 guys to guard 2, use the rest of the 2 guys to guard 3, and hopefully you rotate quick enough that you force some passes that one of those 3 guys involved in the pick and roll defense can recover, and you don't give up a ton of wide open looks, but you're going to have to be willing to give up some open shots on the perimeter. Hopefully you guys really did enjoy this video. A lot went into it. This is one of my favorite videos to record on the channel, though. The X's and O's for me, probably my favorite part of all of basketball. I love, watching games. I love breaking down prospects, talking about some of their skills and strengths. The X's and O's, though, is where everything gets really special to me. As a coach myself, someone who I think sees the game in a different way than a lot of people, I really, really love this aspect to basketball. If you're a coach, let me know which coverage you plan on using with your team. Let me know which level you coach at as well. I'd love to hear who's watching these videos. Then if you just love basketball, I hope you did enjoy this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, let me know in the comment section. Also, smash that like button on this video. Subscribe for more like this. Let me know what other kind of stuff you'd like to see here, especially with these how-to videos as a coach. I'm planning on recording a ton of different stuff like this. Maybe we'll break down how to score pick and roll offensively. We'll talk about zone defense, zone offense, a lot of different stuff to break down for sure. The importance of shot blocking. There's so many different things to talk about in the game that I love. So hopefully you guys enjoy. Leave a like if you did, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.